And for more, we're joined now by Xu Qinduo. He's a political analyst and a senior fellow at Pangold Institution, a China-based public policy think tank. Welcome to the program, Xu. Now, firstly, how significant is this deal for both the US and Taiwan, particularly for the US's broader efforts of bringing manufacturing home?
Thank you for having me. I think the importance of such a deal is mostly for the US. We know the US goal is very clear. That is to bring back manufacturing from overseas, mostly from its so-called allies. For example, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, from Asian countries, regions, and then the European countries from Germany. And as a tool, so Trump imposed a very high tariff on those economies, including Taiwan. And under such a pressure, partners like Japan and South Korea had already agreed to this unequal agreement, trade deal, for example, in order to have a reduced tariff on their exported product to the US, they agreed to invest, 500, for example, in Japan's case, $500 billion US dollars in a certain period of time in the US market. And similarly, Taiwan agreed to invest $250 billion US dollars in a certain period of time in the US. But we can talk more about that. But I think, there's very little for Taiwan to gain. Yes, the government can say, we have a reduced tariff, so we can export to the US with less tariff. And now we are on the so-called level playing field with Japan, with South Korea. But it's a limited success. Its success could actually lead to something very negative to Taiwan itself.
And how much do you think this weakens China's leverage over global semiconductor supply chains?
Actually, it has very little to do with China's semiconductor supply chain. China is strong in this. We call it like in layman's language, like a low level or more traditional semiconductors. China has very strong supply domination of supply, global supply chain, including export to the US. That's why the US has talked about reducing reliance on the supply from the US, but mostly for the traditional, let's say, much lower level, these semiconductors. But Taiwan produces the largest amount of advanced semiconductors, especially from the company called TSMC from Taiwan. So this, it's the mainland, the Chinese mainland, or you can see China, is not competing with Taiwan because they produce different kind of semiconductors. And China itself is investing heavily in producing high-level, more advanced semiconductors to supply its own domestic market. And there's no intention or there's no plan to export to the overseas market because right now China is still lagging behind the production in Taiwan or in the US of advanced semiconductors. So no, it has very little impact on China, I would say.
Right, and as we mentioned, Taiwanese firms have pledged around $250 billion in US investment based on existing expansion plans. But how realistic is that number?
It's a good question. Basically, people raise such a question as with Japan's deal with the US too. Japan's plan is like, yes, we can promise a very big number, 500 billion US dollars investment in the US, like in 5 years or in 10 years. And the plan is like, we can slow down the process. Every year there is some progress. But a few years later, Trump will be out of the White House, and there's a new government. Hopefully, the new government will. You can reason with them. Hopefully, the new government will be rational. The new government will not be as predatory as Trump is. So that's also the plan from Taiwan. Yes, you can promise whatever big number, but whether that number will be enforced or will be implemented at the end of the day is a different story. But mostly, you give a victory signal to Trump. Trump wins again. That's very important, to reach the deal.
Interesting analysis there, Xu Qinduo in Beijing. Thank you very much for joining us.